and welcome back to Franklin Covey's twice weekly podcast on leadership with Scott Miller. I am your host now for nearly 7 years, 500 interviews, both in audio and video format that release twice weekly on Tuesdays and Fridays, all designed to make you a better leader. Franklin Covey, of course, known as the world's most trusted leadership firm, founded decades ago in part by Stephen Covey, the author of the incomparably impactful book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I think this book now has sold close to 70 million copies across, countless numbers of languages and cultures. Been honored to be associated with this firm for nearly 30 years and the host of this podcast since its inception. We twice weekly, spotlight remarkable people, entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, intrapreneurs, CEOs, mid-level leaders, first-time leaders, academics, researchers, stay-at-home parents, people that have researched a topic and have written about it to change people's lives with an abundance mentality. Sometimes we interview people that aren't a household name or a celebrity, but have maybe experienced or suffered, in some cases, an unspeakable setback or tragedy, and have built the courage and vulnerability and willpower to teach through it. And then there are people that kind of coordinate all of those together, like today's guest, and have written multiple books because it's their mission and their passion. They're extraordinarily mission-driven. Today's guest is Kristen Welch. She's a 6-time author. She is the CEO and founder of Mercy House Global, and a book that I absolutely absorbed and fell in love with because as the father and co-parent of 3 young boys with my wife, Stephanie, this book really resonated with me. Kristin is the author of the book, Raising Grateful Kids in an Entitled World, How One Family Learned That Saying No Can Lead to Life's Biggest Yes. Joining us from fairly cold Houston, Texas today, Kristen Welch, welcome to On Leadership.
Thank you. It is such an honor to be here today.
Well, I'm privileged to be able to pick books that I resonate with that I think will build a better world, right? That will build better children, better leaders, better people. As I mentioned, my wife and I are shepherding these 3 young gentlemen in a fairly ungentlemanly world right now. And so I gravitate towards books very much like the one you have beautifully labored and put out into the world. By the way, congratulations on a variety of accolades, including having the famed therapist Gary Chapman from the 5 Love Languages endorse your book. Your book now is close to 1,200 reviews on Amazon, which is just phenomenal. As an author, I want 12 reviews, let alone 1,200 for the books that I've written. Delighted to have you here. Would you rewind a couple of decades? And for those who may not be aware of your book or your history, talk a little bit about your passion, your profession, yourself as a parent, and how you came to write this recent book, Raising Grateful Kids in an Entitled World.
I would love to. So I am primarily a wife and mother and have 3 kids myself. And as I was mom blogging, which is probably an outdated term, back in mid-2007, 8, I was just writing about my daily life and engaging with other moms who were trying to raise kids really against the flow of culture and where we didn't always define success as money or fame, but really as people who were kind and loved their neighbor and made the world a better place. And so I was in the middle of that just as a mom who was writing on a blog and was invited by the world's largest child sponsorship program to travel to Kenya to write about poverty. And that is really where my story took an epic turn. I think I thought I was going to be giving a voice to the voiceless and all the stereotypes of like visiting slums and making the world a better place. And what really happened is I met the world's normal and it changed my own normal. And just really was exposed to oppression and extreme poverty and wanted to contribute in some way, to take what I'd been given, which at the time was a vast readership of moms, wanted to connect them with the global poor. And so came home in 2010 and started a nonprofit called Mercy House Global, whose mission is to empower vulnerable families with opportunities that create hope. We do that in a variety of ways. But that initiative really began to change the way that I parented. And this book really came from that very organic, intentional shift that we began making as a family, which was really to be grateful for what we had instead of what we didn't have. And, you live the story before you can write the story. And so, really, this book is it just was a flow, an outflow of letting the world's normal impact my own. And I think at the time, I would have said I was a good mom who was intentional and wanted to raise kids to be happy and successful. But I did that in a way that didn't expose them to the world's normal. And what I really discovered is, we don't have to teach our kids how to compare themselves to other people. That's just human nature. But we do have to teach them how to compare themselves with people who have less. And I think that's where gratitude is born, where we can see perspective in what we have instead of what we don't. And so, this is sort of my field notes as a mom. And, I'm not a professional in the sense of a psychologist or a parenting expert. I wrote this from the trenches. There was a lot of learning. But what I really set out to do was shift my home so that we put others first. And in doing so, it stirred up gratitude and contentment and joy. It was also really hard, but this book is a reflection of that journey.
It's people like you that make people like me look bad. I thoroughly loved your book. There's a passage in it in the beginning where you talk about the American dream and your first home. And my favorite quote in the whole book is, "What had once been more than enough eventually became not enough." And you tell a whole story about that concept, about buying a home, your first home, your Charlie Brown Christmas tree, and then kind of what happened to you. I think a lot of people will resonate with this. At my invitation, will you kind of retell that story and belabor it, stretch it out? Because I want people to absorb the relatability of your trajectory, but also the insight that can come from your own learnings and your self-awareness around it. It's actually it'll resonate with our listeners and viewers, I hope.
Yeah, I think, we feel entitled to the American dream as Americans. And I certainly did. And we scrimped and saved and bought our dream home. And it wasn't long before that wasn't enough. And I compared myself to my neighbors, and I started referring to it as our starter home. I live in an area that is middle class, affluent, and it was just easy. It was a slippery slope, right? To look at what our neighbors have. And I remember one day I went next door to visit with my neighbor, and they had just ripped out all of their flooring. And I think it's important to note that they were probably 20 years older than my husband and I, and they owned their house, and they had lived in the house for 20 years. But I didn't think about that when I just saw their new flooring. And I didn't even want new flooring until I went to their house, and then came back and decided I needed new flooring also. And I think it's so dangerous to not understand that the American dream and getting what we want, and this whole idea of we deserve it. We see that in our kids very easily as parents, but we're often reflecting it. We're modeling that. And I think that's what a big part of this journey has been. And even the book really talks so much about it's really more schooling for the parent and the adult, more than, your kids aren't necessarily doing it wrong, but we are modeling something that we're imparting to them. And so really it's a call to look at ourselves internally, and who are we comparing ourselves to? There's always someone with more and less than us, but I think we're drawn to the people who have more than us, and that's dangerous. And so we really need to place ourselves in the middle and expose our families and ourselves to people who have less, so that we just have some perspective.
That was beautifully said. Here's a confession. One of my favorite pastimes, as everybody knows from following me on social and reading my books and blogs, I love going to Barnes & Noble. We're big readers in our family. I don't think our children have actually been in a public library before. They think Barnes & Noble is the library. It's a decadent investment we make in our kids, and it's paying off with their vocabulary and how little time they spend on video games. But what my favorite pastime is at Barnes & Noble is I like to buy home design magazines, Architectural Digest, Traditional Home, Modern. I'll walk out of there twice a month with 8 to 10 high gloss, slick magazines of the best kitchens, the best cottages, the best lofts, the best outdoor entertaining. And for me, it's very aspirationally, but like you, it's kind of like going next door and not realizing you needed new floors until you saw them. And not realizing I may not have Matthew McConaughey's income. I may not have Ariana Huffington's, penthouse in Manhattan. And I think it's done some damage to me and my wife because it's aspirational, but it can be kind of, I don't want to say depressing, but always wanting more.
Yes.
And I don't think you'll never have enough until you define how much is enough. I share that story because I want to know, what kind of boundaries have you intentionally put in place with you and your family so that you balance this idea of there's nothing wrong with wanting more. There's nothing wrong with wanting better, but there's a lot more value in being content with what you have. What have you done to put some intentional boundaries in so that you don't set yourself up for failure, disappointment, greed, and that you're grounded in gratitude for what you do have when that was enough?
That's such a good question. I think I ask myself questions, and I don't presume or make assumptions that every good thing that comes in my life is for me to keep. And I think in America, we like to use the hashtag blessed. And I think we are blessed. I also think that the true definition of blessing is sharing what you have and not keeping it all to yourself. And so I like to ask myself, if I get a check in the mail or a refund or a return or a bonus, I like to just ask, is this intended for me to keep and expand what I have, or is this meant to be shared? Because I don't think it's all intended for us to keep. I think we can be a conduit. And I have found so much joy and generosity in sharing what I've been given and modeling that for my kids, and seeing as they become young adults their generosity to others. And so I think that's more of an internal boundary of being honest with ourselves and how much is enough. And I think also I'm a big advocate because of where I work and what I do. One of the opportunities we provide through my nonprofit is artisan made product. And we are really big proponents of the fair trade world where people are treated fairly. And so much of what we consume contributes to modern day slavery. And so I've really educated myself, and I don't want to contribute to the harming of other people by what I consume. It's a core value. It's really important to me that whether it's coffee I drink, clothes I wear, furniture I buy, I want to help people. I don't want to hurt people. And so just a boundary is if I can buy it secondhand, if I can pay a little bit more the first time so that it lasts longer, these are ways that it's not, there's no condemnation or legalism in I never buy anything and I need to, go without or, shame myself for what I have bought. It is purchasing with intention and remodeling a home with intention. I think this bigger is better mentality, it has to stop somewhere. If it doesn't, we're just constantly upgrading our lives, our cars, our technology, our homes, and bigger isn't always better. Actually, I have been doing a lot of research for my next book on really the benefits of a small, quiet life. And I do think that is a trend from social media to just parenting. Like we're sort of rebuffing this whole world of everyone's an influencer and has a big audience, and small, quiet, just a quiet life is something we all crave, I think, because of all the noise. And so a way to really go against the flow and live a countercultural life is to say, this is enough for me. I have more than enough. And we can unlock so much purpose and joy by simply sharing what we have with others.
My blood pressure is lowering just listening to you right now. I'm thoroughly enjoying the conversation. This book is called Raising Grateful Kids in an Entitled World, written for Scott Miller. And so I thoroughly enjoyed this because, like billions of parents, we want better for our children. We want to raise children who are responsible and hardworking and can build skills to thrive in an unpredictable, competitive world we can't even see yet. And we also want to have our children have it a little bit easier than we did, right? We want to give them more and have them have access to more. It's a tension that every parent has. I want to set my boys up for success and give them the things that I didn't have, but I also want them to have the work ethic and the tenacity and the empathy that my parents taught in me. What have you learned about how to thread that tension, which I think is a well-intended desire that we usually lose? Because what we end up doing is, at least I end up doing, is providing too much for my boys, wanting to make their life comfortable, and they don't have nearly the work ethic that my parents instilled in me. And I've realized, my parents did that for a reason. They could have bought that. They could have done this. They could have. Just because they could have doesn't mean they did. My parents are smarter than I thought they were. Take that anywhere you'd like to go.
Yeah, I think everything you just said is so normal, right? Like we want to give our kids the world. And I think we can without giving them everything. I think it is a normal, positive, good motive to want them to have less struggles than we had, right? Like that doesn't make us bad parents. I think we have to be disciplined. And I think that's what it comes down to, is parenting with intention and looking at the big picture and the long game here, right? Like with all of our modern day conveniences and our filtered social media and access. I mean, I grew up in the age where there wasn't the internet, and we watched the nightly news, and that's how we found out what was going on in the world. And it's a difficult world to navigate, even what truth is, right? Like with AI and all of the advances in technology. And so I think, first of all, we've got to give ourselves a little bit of a break and say, my motives are normal here, right? Like it doesn't mean they're impure. But if we aren't careful, we can make it too easy for them. I mean, we don't want our kids' first no or their first real life struggle to be outside the shelter of their home. Because if we always say yes to them, we're really setting them up for failure. And that's the last thing we want to do. But we don't want to launch kids in the world that are terrible employees, and that their boss is like, you're so spoiled. Like, you don't know how to dig deep. You don't have grit. You don't have discipline because everything was handed to you and everything was easy for you. And so it's really an act of love. That's what we're talking about here, is some tough love, saying no so that we can ultimately say yes. And it is not easy. I mean, I have stood toe to toe with a kid in the kitchen and wanted to say yes because I did not want to fight the battle. But I knew for the greater good of this child and our home and their future, I had to say no. And so it takes courage to be this kind of a parent, because we have more resources than we've ever had. We have more advantages in so many areas. It takes a lot of courage to say, I'm going to say no today because um, you need to walk through this. You need to, you know, dig deep and figure out how to solve this problem without me rescuing you. And I now have a 25-year-old and a 22-year-old and a 18-year-old, and it is the most delightful season. I feel like the last 2 years that I've stepped into, where I'm seeing these results in my kids who are now young adults, um, who really gained some of this in their childhood. I'm watching their determination as they face challenges that I cannot shelter them from. And I think that's the truth here. You know, we don't know what is going to be introduced in our kids' lives. We don't know what the future holds. We don't know what's going to happen in our world or in our economy, with their health. You know, life is hard and there are challenges they're going to face. And if we have made everything easy for them, we're not setting them up for success, true success, which is, you know, being good people who contribute to the world and who love others, and who make the world a better place. I think that starts very early on, at home, in the safety of our homes are sanctuaries where our kids can fail and they can fall apart. And if we don't provide that, we're not really setting them up for success.
Kristin, I have no credibility when it comes to restaurant or movie recommendations. Hence my passion for the Olive Garden, Red Lobster, and the Cracker Barrel that I mocked for mercifully on social media. But I have a lot of credibility when it comes to books, because I don't know if I've written 9, I've read thousands and interviewed hundreds, as evidenced by the set behind me. Your book is a top 3 parenting book I have ever read. Top 3. I want to read a passage from your book in chapter 3. You say, I spent many years trying to give my kids everything. The line between what they needed and what I wanted for them blurred. You go on to write, once my kids started elementary school, I entered an entirely new world of competitive living. Before long, I was sitting at a picnic table with other moms waiting for the afternoon bell to ring, listening to conversations about European vacations, lake house renovations, and Ivy League college funds. By that time, I had just returned from my life-changing trip to Africa, and I became disillusioned with always trying to keep up. The little impromptu gatherings around the picnic table felt empty once I had a completely different group of friends to compare myself to, my new friends with much less. You're speaking, of course, about the orphanage and such that you met in Kenya and others. This is the big question, is how do we find gratitude, live a life of confidence, a life of contribution, a life of, having luxuries and joy. Some joy does come from having things. That's not a sin, that's not a problem. But this is a needle that everyone is trying to thread, is how do we find joy for other people and what brings them joy, but also find joy and purpose and meaning as parents for what we have. I mean, this is the big question in life, is how do we know when enough is enough? And more importantly, how do we model that for our children? I want to take my kids to Europe this summer. I think it's a good thing. I work really hard. It's a great cultural opportunity for them. It's 7 days of non-email and non-podcasting and just fun and great time. But my parents didn't take me to Europe. I mean, if we went to Gatlinburg, Tennessee, that was, an amazing thing. You're not a child psychologist, but you are an expert in raising grateful kids. Speak to the millions of us that are trying to thread that needle.
Yeah, there's not an easy answer, but there is an opportunity to acknowledge that true happiness doesn't come from what we have. It doesn't, and I think that's what I learned on that first trip to Kenya back, 15 years ago, is I went as a middle class mom who had everything. I had everything I needed, plus a lot of what I wanted. And I met people in extreme poverty who had a joy and a contentment I did not have. And that really bothered me. And I couldn't understand it. And I began digging at that and peeling back, like, why am I not content? Why do I want more? And when I get more, I only want more. That's the human condition, right? And how can I meet people who have so little, but they seem to have more joy, more contentment than I have? And I think, I discovered that answer by giving my life away and opening up my doors and inviting people inside and going outside my doors and outside my normal. And I think that's how we do it. I think there is always someone who has less than we have. And whether it's, we just had the holidays, I got to invite my kids to go buy Legos for a single mom who was an overcomer of human trafficking, who's lost her job, and her boys needed Christmas gifts. And my kids still at their ages love Legos. And so it was a joy for them to go and pick out Legos for someone else. And there are so many ways and opportunities to, visit our elderly neighbors, vulnerable people in our communities who have less than we have. And I think joy and purpose happens in that crossroads. And I share a story in the book of visiting refugees in our city, which is part of what our organization, we empower refugees, and feeling really guilty because my kids this was years ago, they were young, it was a hot day, Houston weather, and they got sunburned. And we had, kind of just in the 12-hour marathon day of sharing resources with vulnerable people, drug my kids along. And we got back in the car, realized that they were hungry, they were sunburned, and I felt so guilty. And I remember just turning around and just like with tears in my eyes saying, I might have missed it today. Like I just felt bad. And my kids looked at me like I was crazy. They were like, this was the best day of our life. They got to meet people from different cultures. I wasn't micromanaging everything they did. They were dirty. They had so much joy. And I think it was just a window into like, it's okay to mix things up and to get out of our comfort zones and not have all the answers and expose our kids to the rest of the world. And to also take European vacations and to live in that tension of both. And that's what we've really strived to do. It's, we're not, I think balance is critical here because we're going to create more problems and future therapy appointments for our kids if we only buy Legos for the kids who don't have them and not our own, right? Like there is a balance, but I think we tend in our culture to lean, to one side, and that's creating a safety, a bubble, and a comfortable life, and we're afraid of people who are different than us and people we don't understand and people who have less, for security reasons or whatever. And so I think we have discovered that balance in a diverse life, and that has brought us a lot of joy and purpose.
Someone could benefit from your book by literally just reading the call-outs that are on a couple of pages. I'm just going to take a moment, if you don't mind, and read a few of them. Society has shifted truth by bombarding us with an idea until it's normalized. I'm going to repeat that. Society has shifted truth by bombarding us with an idea until it's normalized. I mean, this is exactly the outcome of the recent U.S. presidential election. Yeah, I said it. Here's the next one I love. It's hard to teach our kids to be different from the world if we look just like it. It's time to take back our living rooms, tune out media, and turn off technology. As we end our conversation today, Kristin, what are some things you did well? Is there a couple practical things that maybe you were a pariah socially? You were super unpopular with your kids. You had to double down on something because intuitively, you knew it was right, and it resulted in these 3 kids that I'm sure have challenges, but you're very proud of now. Are there a couple of things that you might challenge all of our listeners to say, consider this or this or this? I think it might work for you.
Yes, definitely. And when you write a book like this in the middle of parenting, it's intimidating and scary. And I'm so thankful that I have things that I can say. I'm proud that I wrote those and they're true. But a couple of those are we sort of created this idea in our home that you could not have screen time until you read first, and so we were pretty big sticklers on reading time earned you screen time. And so if you read an hour, you got an hour of screen time. What would happen is it taught my kids to love reading and to become just avid readers. And they would get so into a book, they would read for 3 or 4 hours and run out of time and not really want to have that much screen time. And so it was a positive incentive to get them to read, but it really turned them into readers. And so that's just a practical thing that we did. We also practice gratitude. I mean, even to this day, right behind me on my kitchen table, I have a gratitude jar. It's filled with slips of paper. This was my daughter who's 18 this past year. We were going through something as a family that's just been challenging. And she said, I want to bring back the gratitude jar. I think every day we need to write down something we're thankful for because all I can think about is what I'm not thankful for. And I started crying when she said it, and she was like, okay, Mom, stop being weird. But I was like, it works. Like, that's something we did the whole childhood, my kids' childhood, is we wrote down things we were thankful for at dinner. And then we would periodically get those out and read them and remind ourselves of what we have been given. And so to have my child ask to do that again, it felt like such a big win. And then I think the third thing I would say, again, this is practical, is I cannot emphasize how critically important family dinners are. Sitting around the table is imperative. It is the time where you connect as a family. And I know with sports and practices and rehearsals and all of those challenges, it is very difficult to make dinner a priority. But when else do you connect as a family? I think we make a habit of doing highs and lows, like what's the high of your day, what's the low of your day, and it's a time to connect with your kids. Sometimes it's the only time during the day where you get to, as a mom or as your child gets to say like what was challenging for the day. And so making dinner a priority, 4 times a week was a minimum for us. We always tried to have dinner 4 times a week together. And then one of those meals, once a week, we ate rice and beans for dinner. I write about this in the book. And as my kids went on to college and lived outside of the home, they kept that practice and got to expose it to their college roommates and their friends. It's just a way to think about people outside of your home and what the typical meal for people around the world is rice and beans. And so we would pick a country to learn about and to think about people who have a life different than us. And at the organization that I run, we actually have a map with cards that facilitate that sort of thing for families around the dinner table, and a lot of resources. But really, it's practical practical, small things that make a big impact. You know, we did go to Europe as a family multiple times because it was on the way to Kenya, which is where our nonprofit has a flagship ministry. And I got to take my kids and raise them. And although those were incredible opportunities, that is not what shaped and framed their childhood. They don't necessarily say that's their biggest memories at this point as young adults. It's the rice and beans for dinner. It's learning about a country. It's inviting a neighbor over. It's buying Legos for a single mom. I think these small things truly make up our lives, and they're not as ordinary as we think they are.
This is why I loved your book so much. I'll leave our listeners and viewers with this quote. Here's the simple truth that isn't so simple. Raising kids to be different from the world really does make them different from the world. Kristen Welch, your book is Raising Grateful Kids in an Entitled World, How One Family Learned That Saying No Can Lead to Life's Biggest Yes. I'm delighted for your success. I am honored to have spent some time with you today and in awe of the influence that you are creating around the world and here in the U.S. and in your own area in Texas as well. I appreciate you pouring into our listeners and viewers today.
Thank you.
And we'll see you back here next week for a new conversation on leadership.